So, down to business. Let me introduce Virginia Lee Montgomery, who goes by VLM, is her artistic name, her nom de plume. And Virginia got her BFA at University of Texas and her MFA at Yale. And she has created art, and primarily video art, but she also is a sculptor, she's a sound artist. She really combines many fields into her work and makes all of this by hand. So all of this she has made. So that's a really interesting note to see with things like video, which often seems so removed. So there's a lot of her hand in this work. And Jana La Brasca is a writer and a PhD candidate at UT. She's in contemporary art. She's writing about Alice Aycock, so we look forward to that. And she worked on the Groundswell show that's at the Nasher, Women in Land Art, which was a field that is undiscovered about women. It's surprising. So anyway, welcome. And after they speak, we'll be open for questions. And so take it away. Welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Thank you.
Friends and friends and friends.
I know, it's such a joy to be able to present this work here in the wonderful gallery space of women in their work. For me, it's really special to be able to share this artwork with a Texas-based audience because a lot of the work relates to things in Texas.
Yeah, and so I guess we first started talking about this body of work when you invited me to be the curatorial advisor for this show. And I remember that was over the summer. We did the studio visit and you told me about the performance you had done at the beginning of this year with your mother at NASA in Houston. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah, it's for me as an artist, I'm a research-based artist, which means a lot of my work has all these different layers behind it that may not be visible in the actual art that you see on the walls. But in the studio visit, I was talking about how in January I had this conversation with my mom, talking about usual things I love to talk about, like Luna moths. And I was like, Mom, I'm raising more Luna moths, and I just think it's so tragic that Luna moths are these beautiful, vibrant green creatures. They're native here to Texas and other parts of North America. And they're so obsessed with the moon, but yet they're never able to gain proximity to the thing that they love because they're down here on Earth and the moon's up there in the sky. And I was like, what if we find a way to limit that distance? And I was thinking about how I could do that. And I was like, Mom, would you drive with me to NASA Space Center Houston so I can introduce some Luna moth cocoons to the moon rocks? And she was like, okay. So that kind of kicked off this entire body of work. Came from this metaphysical desire to, actually allow the Luna moth to get proximity to the thing that she loves most. And sure enough, my mom and I went to NASA Space Center Houston, and inside my camera bag, I secretly had about 12 live Luna moth cocoons, which luckily did not come up on the X-ray machine because they're little natural organic forms. And we went into the moon rock room, and I gave my mom the camera, and I was like, Mom, you're in charge of documenting this performance. And so she held my camera, and then I grabbed each cocoon, and I held it in front of the glass where the moon rocks are on the other side, and I made this orbiting gesture. So that way, the Luna moth could actually orbit around the moon in proximity. And then that kicked off this whole show.
Yeah, and so you told me that story, and I said, you might consider writing that down.
You did.
And so that ended up becoming this really beautiful text that Virginia wrote that's on display in the front vestibule of the gallery. And that's also where we drew the title for this program from. And yeah, there's so many directions we could go in from here.
That's true.
What's on our little mind map?
Desire for proximity.
Yes. So one thing that I found really striking about the black and white image that's on the verso of the catalog was this way that it's sort of crystallizing a lot of different aspects of your practice, both this idea of bringing closer or sort of maybe fulfilling this imagined wish or real wish of the moth to become close to the moon, but then also that distance that's maintained. You can't touch the moon rocks because they're toxic.
That's true, they're toxic.
And you're behind this glass wall of the display. Your mom's at a distance from you. Importantly, at the top of that image, there is this phrase, touch the moon.
I know, it's deeply ironic because you can't as an organic thing. It'll make you sick.
So there's this, both this sort of, this closeness that you're conjuring, but also these kinds of distances that are being maintained. And, you know, as I wrote, I feel like there's this really beautiful tension between, you know, the circle as the model for secure attachment. You're both kind of held enthralled to something and fascinated by something and drawing closer to it, but also being forced on some level to keep some distance. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of the circle and a relationship and how that might operate within a performative dynamic, you know, something that I was thinking about a lot in this work was pulling from psychoanalytic theory that a lot of feminist artists and thinkers in the 1970s were revisiting Lacan's famous essay, The Mirror Stage, which for those of you who haven't read it, you know, outlines this philosophical idea where the moment a baby becomes conscious of its separateness from its mom is when it sees itself in the mirror for the first time. And so in that moment, it's kind of magical because the baby's like, oh, I'm a separate conscious thing. But then it realizes like, oh my God, I'm separate from my mom. We're not actually one entity. And so that relationship is really important because the mirror serves a really structural function and enabling that kind of triangulation. And so in my own work, you know, as a lens-based artist, looking through a camera, which is an eye, looking at these creatures, I'm always very aware of kind of this distance. And a lot of my interest specifically in Luna moths is because on their wings they have these beautiful round eye spots, which those of you that have studied biology and biomimicry know that they are eye spots that evolved. We know from the fossil record that there are insects that show this kind of fake eye pattern on its wings going back 150 million years ago. And just for reference, the dinosaurs were last here 65 million years ago. So it always just blew my mind to think that there's really something to like this eye form, and that being as like a deeply significant part of us on life on this planet, like organizing consciousness and the gaze in relation to these eye shapes.
Yeah, and then there's also the connection to, you know, as much as, you know, the egg, the cocoon, the nest, but also the planet and the ellipsoid orbits that we take. I was reviewing my notes from one of our studio visits, and I asked you what you wanted out of the text, and you said something to the effect of, you know, having people not necessarily come away from this caring about moths, but about kind of experiencing that unity and that relay, that morphological kind of connection among these different scales of life or across different kinds of life forms.
That's true. So, you know, I think one of the strange things about being an artist is when you come to the realization that you can make art about anything, and then it becomes a lot of pressure because you're like, okay, how do I want to show up in the world? And, you know, thinking about that, I was like, okay, if I'm going to use my voice to speak to something, I really want to emphasize concepts of unity, especially at this moment in time where we're going through climate change and there's intense violence in the world. And so, you know, kind of thinking about like, well, what facilitates unity, I think on the most base level is looking at, you know, unity on a subatomic scale, and then you are looking at circles, you're looking at spheres, you're looking at the most fundamental parts of matter, and then looking at how those attributes of matter organize themselves, and beautifully, matter tends to organize itself in spirals, in circles. And that became kind of the formal template for helping me kind of organize my thoughts of all these different interests I have, from mysticism to biology to physics to feminist performance art collaboratively with my mom, but wanting to ground everything in kind of pointing back at the circle.
Which is both kind of maybe a symbol of enclosure or unity, but also kind of a portal.
Yeah, and a portal is, I mean, that's the irony of a structural form like a portal, is it both enables closeness and it enables distance.
Yeah.
Because there's that trajectory that's happening.
Yeah. And I don't mean to discount the moths. I mean, I think we all will come away from this caring about moths. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about when you started to work with moths, what it's like to work with them.
So my interest in moths is something that I really picked up in the past few years. So for context, I was born and raised here in Texas. I grew up in Houston. I always love to tell people how growing up in Houston on the bayou, it was filled with wildlife. So from the youngest age, I was always out there catching critters. So creatures have always been a big part of my life, and I kind of never stopped that biological interest. And then also being in Houston, it's the home of the Menil collection, which is one of the world's most extravagant surrealist art collections. So from my youngest age, I can remember a reverence for NASA and a reverence for surrealism. And the bayou, animals. And so
Venn diagram.
a Venn diagram, yes.
Circles.
Yes, a Venn diagram of circles. And then looking at those overlap areas, that's kind of where my art practice exists. So Luna moths are something that I've always loved, but the past like 10 or so years prior, I was living in New York City. And when you live in New York City, you're always busy, you're always working, you live in a tiny apartment that isn't set up for raising insects. But when the pandemic happened, it gave me an opportunity to come back to Texas, to be close to my family during that moment of crisis, and to finally be living in a larger space where I could set up my moth husbandry studio. So it was around 2020 that I got really into raising moths, and that started this journey of the deep care cycle that's involved in starting with them from when they're that tiny little egg, and then they go through the different caterpillar cycles, and then they go into the cocoon during pupation, and then a few months later they emerge as the imago, the adult form.
Also termed psychoanalysis.
It's also termed in psychoanalysis. And during that whole process, I would have my camera, because I just loved the beauty of that quite literal metamorphosis, and then also thinking about how lovely that was to witness during a time when the world felt like a very scary place. Just to be reminded that like there is life, there is rebirth. And for me, I think working on such a small macro scale was also very intuitive. I think, when you get overwhelmed in life, sometimes you just like start small. So also it just was nice to build these small film sets and create these little dream worlds for my moths to live within. And so as I was cocooned within my home studio, the moths and I together were cocooned in the studio space, and we were living out these kind of dream worlds together.
Speaking of dream worlds, the artist's bed. The artist is present, and so is the artist's bed. Can you tell us about this object?
Yes. So I have to confess that I didn't like literally make every single object in the show. I did not make this bed. This bed is an antique shaker bed, and I have loved the Shakers for quite some time. Some of you might know that they were a radical group going back to the United States 1700s era, and they were founded by a woman, and they were kind of like, they were a very interesting religious order, but they were founded by a woman. So like within the power dynamics of the United States, they were kind of like this proto-feminist organization. They were celibate, but they loved to make objects. So that is where they channeled their libido. It was in sublimation. And so I've always loved shaker objects because I felt like they had a real power to them because of that sublimated ego. And so I've loved the shaker bed for so long, and for me it's such like a vital part of my practice, which is to facilitate the architecture of my dreams. And so I wanted to have this bed in the space, but also in thinking about the show, I was like, well, it would be really helpful for the moths and I to have this like agential relationship in terms of the co-creation of the work, where I was like, the moths themselves probably need their own bed to also dream, to also like actualize their own, you know, inner life fantasies. And so I constructed this moth scale model of my bed, and that is also what you see in the video.
It'll come around.
It will. I know where we are right now in the moon moth bed sequence. It's going to show up in about 45 seconds. But yeah, and so that scale shift dynamic is really something I'm interested in. Again, if you think about like the tiniest of a circular atom to like a giant orb in the sky, the moon, but you're still looking at that same form, but just at different scales. There's the bed. And I also love the fact that like this bed is, I don't know, 6 feet tall, and it's human scale, but the moth bed is, I don't know, like 15 feet tall?
Relative, yeah.
Like as a projection.
Oh, in the projection.
Like as a simulation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know,
there it is.
yes, there's the bed.
And there's the moth newly hatched from her cocoon, using the bed as a device so she can hang upside down and then let her wings unfurl. So the bed did have a function in a way as well for the moths.
Yeah, and so it becomes, I mean, this is a standalone video work, but in the space, you kind of have this relay between the projection, this work, the bed with sleeping stone.
Yeah.
And so it sort of begs the question, like, am I moth size? Is this a bed for an enormous moth?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
but that kind of maybe connects with some of the thinking you've done about the butterfly effect.
It is. So part of the reason I wanted to have this beautiful stone object here, which is about 110 pounds of white marble that I carved and polished, and I wanted that shape to be there because to me it looks like a giant Luna moth egg. And I love creating this image of a big Luna moth emerging from it within the space. And yeah, to answer your question about the butterfly effect, so it's a pretty pop culture term. I think everybody knows it, but
And then meteorology, mathematics.
Meteorology, mathematics, I think MIT in the 1970s. But it proposed this idea that really small changes in a system could accumulate to then manifest a larger change. And so the original weather model propositioned this idea that if a butterfly flapping its wings in Oklahoma was present, that would actually turn into a typhoon off the coast of China. And I always thought that was a really powerful image. And then also thinking about, again, just living in this precarious time where we sometimes feel so overwhelmed by the chaos in the world around us that it's hard to feel like your actions matter, and it's hard to feel like you're making a difference. And so I thought, well, if I quite literally look at the butterfly effect as being like little actions that might make something bigger happen, like what if I raise moths, release them, and then.
And it cuts both ways, right? Because it's something, it's a way to produce an effect for good as much as it is, it emphasizes the importance of what you do and that everything you do has an effect, whether it's positive or negative.
That's true, and I think, it's an interesting quandary to also take up in the studio, because I feel like in the studio as an artist, oftentimes you are working under the context of like, I'm just experimenting, I'm just doing whatever, which is fine. But if you really are like, no, I want to be intentional with my actions, because I really think every action could accrue meaning in a larger system, then it's like how I show up and like, okay, what do I want to do?
To go back a little bit to the giant egg.
Yeah.
That marble comes from an important source.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, a lot of research went into all the materials within the show. I have a background in sculpture, so I'm obsessed with like the thingness of objects and their history. So that marble right there actually comes from a quarry in Vermont, the Rutland Quarry. And its significance culturally within the United States is it is the site where all the white marble throughout Washington, D.C. was pulled from. So, you know, following Trump's election, when I was thinking a lot about like the materiality of power, I was like, where does this white marble come from? And can I get my hands on it? Because I was thinking a lot from the perspective of the marble. Maybe the marble doesn't want to be this like erect machismo phallus of American power. Maybe the marble wants to be something more soft and sensual. And I don't know if anyone had ever facilitated that opportunity for the stone. So I went to Vermont through the Carving Studio and Sculpture Center residency to that quarry site, and they had wonderful offcuts of marble. And I grabbed it and I made it into an orb. And here it is in Texas.
It's gorgeous.
Thanks. It's also the same marble that the stone Cocoon is made out in the lobby. And yeah, similarly, I was like, maybe the marble wants to be a symbol that signifies like rebirth, the cocoon, the emergence.
And can you say something about this other material that this sculpture is
memory
made out of?
foam. Memory foam. I love memory foam. It's it feels so strange. An interesting thing about memory foam is that it kind of remembers nothing but itself. It's a somewhat selfish material. And it was developed by NASA. It was also a material that was created as a way of kind of cocooning astronauts from G-force as they were being launched out of the atmosphere. And then later it was, you know, released to the consumer market, as many, you know, military technologies later are. And then the name memory foam was kind of added on there afterwards. I wish I could track down who the advertising company was that came up with the name. But what I love about memory foam is its relationship to kind of the human body and being like a mediator of pressure, of resistance.
And that it also is mitigating gravity or enabling, let's say, someone who were to rest on this with the stone to experience their shared response, or gravity is exerting its force equally on all the materials that make us up and everything else.
Yeah, and I also, what I like about having this object here is the stone, it also performs the role of a body experiencing gravity in the way that I always think about all these objects always performing their objectness, but at the same time wanting to allow them to rest. Because it's hard performing all the time, you know?
So true.
Yeah.
So, but you also do perform a little bit
I do, it's
in
true.
these works. We don't see all of you or hear your voice, but we see your hand,
Yeah,
we see your eye,
it's true.
and we see the drill.
Yes.
So could you talk about performance or, you know,
Yeah, the
gesture?
gesture, you know, again, going back to the butterfly effect, when you think about really, really small gestures that add up. And when I'm creating this world where it's like me and the moth looking at each other for hours and hours on end, and I think about, you know, how big and terrifying I probably am to the moth. And so I'm always like very aware of my body and not wanting to frighten it. And then also as a video editor, I'm very conscious of when I appear on screen, and I always want the moth to be kind of the central protagonist of my work. I don't think like my humanness should be the most important thing. Like I really see myself as just a facilitator. But yet I still want my body to be present, you know? And so if you look on the screen right now, you'll start to see my finger. And everything right there is shot to scale. So, you know, the moth is really that big. The 3D printed model of the moon is that big, and my hand is really that big. And so I want to interact with the Luna moth in this world, but in a way that's like very, very, very gentle. I don't actually, want to touch the moth and hurt it, but, my gestures within this system are also a part of kind of this chain of events that the butterfly effect kind of postulates. So in this moment, it's like the moth comes out of the cocoon, it climbs up the bells, which makes sound and the sound effect. The moth then makes its way to the bed, it unfurls its wings. When that process completes, then the bell is kind of jingling, and then that awakens the human hand, which enters the frame. And then once the human hand touches the bell, that kind of summons the drill. And the drill also has an abstract role as a character within this surrealist film, and it's that within this narrative of metamorphosis and rebirth, there's destruction, and the drill symbolizes destruction. And so what you're seeing here that the drill is doing is quite literally destroying images from the video. This is a little bit hard to explain, but the way I make these shots, it's not digital CGI, it's all real stuff. So I'm editing my video, and I take a screenshot of a particular frame, and then I print it out and mount it on foam core board, and then I take a drill, and I'm drilling into that. But I'm recording that process and then bringing it back into the video timeline. So that's why it looks really trippy, because I'm physicalizing a digital image and kind of employing a film editing technique that you more often see in animation. But I'm using like physical things. And then for this shot, this is also like a multi-layer shot where I really am looking through that hole in the foam core board, but then I've taken that image and I projected it on a TV screen, and then I put glass over the TV screen, and then I'm pouring honey down that. So you're watching the light from the TV screen move through the honey, then I'm capturing that, and then bringing back in the timeline. And you might be thinking right now, why honey? Well, again, if like the drill is this destructive agent, then I wanted there to be a healing agent in return, and that's the honey, because honey is beautiful. It's also of the insect world, which I love. And honey, I love the fact that cross-culturally honey has symbolized this conduit for the metaphysical and the transition between like seasons or events or the next life. Like the ancient Egyptian pharaohs used a lot of honey in the embalming process. So I always like to think of like honey as being this like beautiful last sensorial experience before one enters the next life. So,
and it has no expiration, right? It just
it keeps going. It's I think when they find archaeological digs in like the Roman times, there'll be vases full of honey and it's still edible. And I love the fact it's also antiseptic, so it really does have capabilities of keeping bacteria out of the body and healing the body. And it also has little air bubbles within it. And again, thinking about circles.
very important. Yes.
Honey is a conduit for little pockets of air that then take the form of bubbles.
On their own. You don't even have to.
I know, I do have to force it to do that. Yeah. It's just when I'm making the videos, I really want to try to highlight the physicality of all these different elements in the world. I think digital screens and digital media is kind of everywhere, but oftentimes it feels so alienating. But if everything can be like physical and touchable and knowable, I don't know, it makes the world feel less overwhelming to me.
Yeah, definitely. And so while this film is, very intentionally edited and paced, the other two on view are real-time, single shot
it's true.
works.
That's true. So they're real time in the sense that there's not editing. This video behind me, named Luna Bell, slight play on words because Bell is B-E-L-L-E, is a 6-minute video, and it is a 6-minute video that documents the incredible moment that a Luna moth flying around my studio decided to land on a little bell and just rest there for 6 minutes. And I was so mesmerized by that moment in time and being able to capture it. And I also loved the intense quietness. And I don't know if anyone here meditates, but there's sometimes a moment in a meditation practice where you're like, silence is oppressive, like stillness is oppressive. And so as I was just watching this little moth spin slightly because of, latent forces of the Coriolis effect that activates air movements and causes things to spin, I just was amazed by this moment of kind of like deep time, and also just amazed that this little moth chose to sit on the bell in a way that was so choreographically quirky. Like, I love the fact that her top arms are grabbing the string like this, and then the middle arms are kind of like grabbing the center part, and then the last ones are kind of stabilizing, and you can really see like the weight of her little body and the fuzziness of it.
And she's no longer with us.
And she's no longer.
Immortalized.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, because how long is the moth's lifespan?
Moths only live for 7 days. They do not live long, which is part of the reason why I think they're a wonderful emblem to symbolize like rebirth and renewal and metamorphosis, and also kind of how special life is. They only live 7 days, partly because the adult moth does not have a mouth or a digestive tract or an anus. They emerge purely just to find each other, just to make connection, just to lay eggs, and that's it. And I mean, there's
something drawn toward the light.
And be incredibly, unrelentlessly drawn towards the light and the moon.
Oh yeah, what was the thing about the eye spots on the wings? They're always trying to keep the moon at their back.
Oh yeah. So when I was researching the video, I was trying to figure out why is it exactly that moths circle lights like this. And I'm sure we've all seen it. You're outside at night, you see a porch light, and you watch moths or bugs fly in a circular moment. And I was like, why is that? So I read this fascinating article that just came out a few years ago in an entomology journal. And someone had figured out the reason that moths arc in that way is that as they navigate, they can sense the light on the back, and they're always trying to keep the light to the back at all times. And that is a very effective way of moving if the light source is stable up in the sky in a big thing. So that way, as they're keeping the light on their back, they're able to arc in the curvature of the earth, across a great lateral distance. But when that light is condensed as like a porch light, totally disorients them. Like if they saw this light, they would just do this forever. Because they're forever attracted to the moon and forever bound to do this gestural choreography of keeping the light to their wings.
This is reminding me of something you were talking about earlier. I mean, to kind of come back to this question of proximity and distance.
Yeah.
I realize we haven't talked about sound yet.
Yeah.
And all the echoey sounds, which is another way of articulating the size of a space or determining where you are.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're touring a cave and a little drop of water falls to the bottom of the cave from a stalactite, you hear that echoing sound. And what's making that echoing sound is, the smooth sides of the cave, and that's an interior space, so the sound wave is like bouncing and then returning. So you're getting this like nice arc. And so as I'm doing the sound design, and I'm always keeping within my mind how much I love circles and waveforms and spirals, and then also looking for sounds that function in that same way. And I also love the fact as a sculptor that an echo does denote how large a room is, because the distance of the echo will give you some type of information about like how far away the wall is. And I love that. So it's like a way of sculpting in space, but with non-physical means.
And where do you source some of these sounds, besides the bells, which importantly are small enough for the Luna moth to actually play?
Yeah,
it's a percussion instrument.
And actually, it's coming up right now. Yeah, bells are categorized as a percussion instrument. So you can't hear this right now, obviously, because the sound's off. But if you could, you would hear this light jingling sound. And that is the moth actually playing the bells, which was really, really important to me because I wanted to say that I made a collaborative soundscape with a moth. So that way the moth would feel like it was an equal part of the project. But to answer your question about where I record sounds, the truth is kind of everywhere. I have a field recorder with me, and I love to get those kind of quiet, everyday sounds of like a pin dropping or, a DeWalt drill going like, and then I'll layer all of that together in combination with natural sounds. So there's always like human world sounds, and then there's natural world sounds. And those might be field recordings of thunderstorms from the park, state parks like McKinney, or Longhorn Caverns for the water droplet. But I collect all these little sound files, and then I bring them into my editor, and I'm basically making a soundscape that consists of like hundreds of tiny little wave files. So it's kind of like a quilt. If you think about a quilt being made of tons of little stitches, it's like that, but with sound.
Beautiful.
Thanks. Wow, we made a mind map of our conversation.
Yes. Gesture, we talked about scale. I mean, should we talk about this show? What did putting together this exhibition teach you? What did it mean to put these things all together in this space?
Yeah, for me, it's really special to feel like I can physicalize the inside of my brain and to be able to show all these different elements that I'm thinking about, especially in terms of being an artist who's in a studio that's capturing these really, really small gestures of uncanny intimacy between me and the moth, but then being able to amplify that and show that on a really big scale by showing it on a really big projector. Because as we know, like watching a video on your iPhone, tiny little screen, is a very different experience than being able to like see the light hit the wall at a very big level.
Speaking about light hitting the walls, we haven't yet talked about the subject of the color blue.
Oh, yeah, so there's a lot of blue in here. There's a lot of blue.
There's extra blue. There's the ambient blue of the video.
There's the ambient blue of the video. There's the natural blueness of this particular brand of memory foam that I like. And then I did lighting design, so we have blue theater lights that are positioned in here. I love the color blue. It, for me, it's very calming. Like as soon as I feel blue light, I'm like, okay, I'm safe now. The other thing I find really interesting about the color blue presented within the sense of video art or the digital space is that blue is typically the color of a projector screen when nothing is being sent out. So it's kind of the color of nothingness. And so if you're thinking about nothingness having a color within the 21st century digital realm, it's like this color blue.
But it's also kind of emulating the nothingness of distance or of the sky or the clarity of water. Or
Yeah, and the nothingness of distance is true because, you know, as you're exiting the earth and you're going through the atmosphere, the upper level is that violet realm, that blue realm. And so whenever I'm riding in an airplane and you look at the intense blueness of the sky, I'm always thinking like, wow, that's the boundary line. Like that's the boundary line between us on Earth and like the moon up there in the sky.
And this other kind of scalar transition where you're looking down, because you fly a lot.
I do fly a lot. I travel a lot for a day job, so I do think a lot about like what it means to be in the sky, what does it mean to be flying, what does it mean not to be like in one location but experiencing life from different vantage points, and like also just the strangeness of having a body moving through the world. Yeah.
How are we for time?
We're at 1:44.
Should we open it up
Yeah, we can have questions now, yeah.
for questions?
Yeah, so I guess we're gonna do some Q&A, and I'm really happy to answer anything. And also, I
Can you
see.
speak one more time about psychofeminism, metaphysical?
Yes, I can. So, some of the theory that went into this work was inspired by the writings of Dr. Donna Haraway, that some of you all may know from reading in feminist studies classes or media study classes. She has this wonderful essay that came out in the 1980s called the Cyborg Manifesto, where she's like grounding feminism in context to the digital realm. It's like very groundbreaking for the 80s, especially now in a moment where we're all talking about AI. But she brings in this gender dynamic. However, right now in this moment in time, she's still writing, and a lot of her work has shifted somewhat away from the machine digital realm and instead is looking at the animal realm. So I was reading this book of hers called When Species Meet, and she's really looking at power structures between people and animals, and also trying to kind of map out where consciousness comes into that equation. So the same way, I guess earlier she was like, where's the consciousness entering the machine? Like, where's the consciousness interacting with the person and the animal? And her ideas really fit nicely with this other theory that's coming out of contemporary philosophy called panpsychic metaphysics, which is kind of investigating, as traditional metaphysics does, like what's the nature of reality, like what is time, what is meaning. I mean, metaphysics is something like Plato wrote about, so it's not like new, but the panpsychic part does make it contemporary in that it postulates this idea, somewhat borrowed from contemporary findings in physics, that consciousness may be everywhere. And it might be everywhere in the way that gravity is everywhere, and that consciousness might actually be just a fundamental force in the universe, and that it's not necessarily that special or unique, it's just everywhere. And I was thinking a lot about that for this show, just how wonderful it is to think that there's conscious everywhere, but then also the absurdity of them thinking, well, that means that like the rock is conscious, and the bed is conscious, and the drill is conscious, and like everything's conscious.
Or that even if, I mean, obviously there's no way for us to tell whether, there's no way for us to verify this,
No.
but the notion that, the notion of the possibility that that all matter has consciousness is really powerful, for sure.
Yeah, it's powerful because then it also really dispels hierarchical orientation, where you're like, that thing is less conscious, so I'm going to be aggressive towards it. And where I think panpsychic metaphysics is really interesting in a contemporary feminist orientation is that folds in really nicely with ecofeminism that really wants to give rights and agency to attributes of the natural world, like rivers. And the example I always like to cite is this 2017 parliamentary decision coming out of New Zealand, which granted a river the same rights as a person, which sounds like kind of absurd, but you realize, no, it's structural. It's structural so that the river isn't exploited. And so what I really like about panpsychic, metaphysical, ecofeminist philosophy is that it can be a way to make change in the world. And and then also the way I just set up my videos, I'm trying to create a system where like me as the human is not the focus.
Yeah, and that also, that there are maybe like Easter eggs, or there's a lot to unpack in here for someone who has that background in theory, but that visually and sonically and aesthetically, it's kind of maybe closing some of that gap for someone who may not be as familiar with those ideas, or getting them across in a nonverbal way.
Thanks. Yeah, that when I create work, I really want things to be accessible, and I think that might come out of a sense because, my own autobiography is I'm an artist, but I don't come from like an art family. So I've always been very aware from a young age just how cryptic and kind of exclusionary the art world can seem. And so as much as I love theory, I want things to be accessible, and I think a great way to do that is to model it from the perspective of a teacher. So you're like, this is the thing, this is how the thing operates, and you have to like not only tell but show. So that's kind of how I also make the decisions that I do in my work. And also what, inspired me then to write the text about the day my mom and I went to NASA Space Center Houston with the Cocoons to introduce them to the moon. And I'm so glad you encouraged me to write that out and actually share that moment, because that's usually the kind of stuff I'm secretly doing behind the scenes that I don't always talk about, because some people think you're crazy.
Yeah, no, it was far more amazing than I ever would have anticipated, and I thought it was going to be good, so.
Yeah.
Someone back? Yeah.
In thinking about those interspecies dynamics and kind of the feminist themes that you've touched on, and power and liberation, did you grapple at all with the process of kind of captivating these moths for their entire lifespan? And what was that process of thinking like for you?
So I didn't always have them off for their entire lifespan. So after I finish filming them, I typically release them. And that's
So you only shoot them kind of right at the beginning.
Yeah, I only shoot them right after they've hatched because one, I just love the process of them exiting from the cocoon. I mean, to me, that's just
Another
like,
portal.
yeah, it's another portal. They're like coming into the world after they've done something incredible where they reoriented all their body parts to create wings. And after they come out, you know, they have to dry out their wings, and that full process is about 45 minutes. In the video, it's sped up via time lapse to be about 10 seconds. And then after their wings are large, they tend to be pretty chill, and they're chill for about an hour. But then after that, they are ready to be out in the world and moving. And I mention that because I can't really work with them after that point because they're just flying all around. So one of the nice things about this practice is that it encourages me to raise them, but it forces me to release them because they become difficult. But then they get to go live outside. Yeah. Yep.
Well, first I want to applaud you for creating, being a multidisciplinary artist and creating works that kind of have such a beautiful harmony. And something you touched on a second ago that I'd love for you to expand on is that, like, behind the scenes story of the story of being one class with your mother, that's kind of a rare thing that you share. I think it's really interesting in art how you kind of create these experiences that you would not do otherwise, like normally.
Mm-hmm.
Are there examples of that? Do you feel like a lot of that is just in your process, or do you think it kind of ends up in your work as well?
Oh, thank you for that question. So, I think what I heard is you're asking me, you know, as an artist, when I'm doing these different kind of metaphysical exercises behind the scenes, you know, how does that come into my work, or what's the decision to kind of keep that obtuse and to the side? Yeah, I think, being an artist it's a strange thing for me personally because I'm very aware of different professional elements of the art world, and then how as an artist you have to kind of code switch between those professional realms. And so in one capacity you might be stigmatized for being really out there, and then in another capacity you might be encouraged to be even more out there. So it's always a negotiation of like, what do I want to reveal? Because I have a background in art theory. I did my MFA at Yale, which is a program that's known for its theoretical aggression. And so people will really analyze what you're doing. And I think coming out of that practice, it's just made me hypersensitive to how much I want to be seen. And I'm also a really, really sensitive person. I mean, I like to think of myself as, friendly and accessible, but I'm never like the loudest voice in the room, And so it's always tough for me to share those moments where it's like, really, this is like the creative mania inside my brain. And it's like, some people will get it and some people won't. And it's, for me, it's really nice to have encouragement to share particular moments, and it's really nice to work with the curator to kind of help me weave through that. Because ultimately I want to create work that is, knowable and accessible. And I'm also very self-aware from, doing psychoanalysis, that our brains are really full, brilliantly messy places. So there's an art to navigating it.
And doing things sometimes we're not always aware of.
Yeah, the subconscious. So that's true. I mean, there's other times where I don't think I'm always aware of the actions that I'm doing, and I don't always see them as art with a capital A. It's just kind of me being a weirdo, like
Figuring it out.
Figuring it out. Like I don't know necessarily if being on the internet on a forum to buy bugs is part of the
Would you
art.
mind saying some of those URLs for folks in the audience?
Yeah, it's funny, I should have looked this up a second ago, because the name is something like really literal, like bug trader, or like insect.net. But those are the message boards where you can go and you can buy eggs or cocoons, and you can search by country to ensure that, you're not importing illegal species, which I would never condone. I mean, these guys are native to most of North America, so I love
at home.
Yeah, they're at home here. This is their ecosystem. But yeah, the internet is a great place for researching bugs, and I encourage anyone that wants to raise them. But but to go back to like that gesture, it's hard to know like where the start and the stop of the practice is, especially when you're not like a painter. You know, I don't walk into like a white wall room and pick up a paintbrush and do this on a canvas. You know, I'm doing a lot of other weird stuff, so it's hard for me sometimes to know what in that weird stuff is like the meat of art, because it's not as easy as being like, oh, but I do this and I'm a painter. So it's something I'm always figuring out. Any other questions?
There's actually an Instagram live question.
We have an Instagram live question. Okay.
First one.
Out there.
Can you share a little more about your thoughts on hierarchy of consciousness? What does it say that our society is quick to anthropomorphize AI, but less for lower life forms like plants and animals?
Oh, if you have thoughts on this, I'm also curious.
I want to hear yours first.
Okay. So, I guess first to hit on the anthropomorphizing tendency, I think I've been asked that before, as people have like wanted to know what my relationship is with anthropomorphizing Luna moths, for example. And my response to always that question is, it really depends, like, oh, sorry, I got distracted. How you anthropomorphize an object or an animal really reflects yourself. So it's kind of interesting that that process in a way is kind of a psychological mirror, that each person is going to anthropomorphize differently kind of how they see the world. So I think that's really interesting. So I try to maintain like a neutral orientation, but I do think because I have a tendency to be a caretaker, I always want to assume the role as a caretaker when I'm working with a vulnerable species like a Luna moth. And then I think the other question was about consciousness and AI. I'm not an AI expert, and I think AI is a really interesting thing that we're looking at right now. My own curiosity about AI is that it is something that is, it's like a force or a thing that's out there. We all can agree on that, but as a spiritual person, I don't know where the concept of a soul fits within AI. And what I think is really interesting about most of us living life forms here on Earth, from a moth to a human, like we experience a birth and a death. AI doesn't have that. It doesn't have something at stake. Like it can never really die. So I think AI is interesting, but I'm also like a bit suspicious of something that like just doesn't. I feel like it doesn't have as much at stake as like the rest of us.
Like, did AI ask this question?
I know, right? Most like, don't come at me, please.
Also, like when you started talking, I started to think about, maybe, because I had those questions myself about your work and your collaboration with the moths, I think, when I first became aware of it. And I think maybe it's helpful to draw a distinction, however subtle it might be, between anthropomorphizing and this kind of theory of panpsychism that you're talking about, because I think to anthropomorphize is to imagine something without human consciousness in our own image and ascribe to it forms of thinking or feeling that we would experience. And I think that like the difference, panpsychism might be ascribing consciousness or theorizing consciousness to beings that we don't traditionally believe to have that, but it's not prescribing that consciousness taking the same form or being recognizable up to us or having a logic that we can uncover, but kind of allowing it to be out there and maybe beyond the realm of our immediate understanding, and having that be okay and to exist independently of whether or not we acknowledge it as such.
Yeah, I like that. And I know that within panpsychic theory, there's those that write about objects and everything having consciousness. It's thought to be there's different degrees of consciousness. So essentially consciousness is a spectrum. It's not a black or a white thing. There's like a spectrum of how it presents, which if I had to put money on things, that's what I put the money on. Yeah.
I will say too that like in moments of like laziness or fatigue, I've tried to get an AI to do things for me for work that it can't do. So I'm not obsolete yet. We're not obsolete yet, people.
That's true. That's true. And I think one of the interesting things about AI is its capacity for pattern recognition. And I'm also an artist that very much so studies pattern recognition, especially with my obsession with eyes and the eye spots on Luna moth wings and like what is this pattern recognition? I know, ring wing. I know, it's a tongue twister, but AI has like a funny way of organizing information and patterns. And again, I think I'm always kind of suspicious about it because I think until AI can fully die, and I don't know what that would look like, but I just feel like, you know, like the wood that was made to create that little bed that was once a tree. The tree was, you know, grew and then it died. I just feel like there's so much in the material world that shares this journey of like creation and then dispersal. And AI I don't think has that, so maybe that'll be built into it one day so it doesn't overtake the world. Maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the
Live
question. I hope that was helpful as two non-AI experts.
Can you talk about the composition of marble to that point?
Yeah, so one of the things I like specifically about marble is that it's a stone that's made out of calcium carbonate, because marble is the next stage of compression of limestone, and limestone is made out of the compressed bodies of coral and sea life. Like, part of the reason why there's a lot of limestone here in Austin is that 65 million years ago, Austin was a Cretaceous era coral reef. So if you've been hiking in Shoal Creek, you've probably seen little fossilized fossilized creatures. And so if the geology of Austin had more heat and pressure, that would have then turned into marble. And so what I love about marble is that it has that direct relationship to the body and the organic body, and that, you know, our bones are made of calcium carbonate. And yeah, I love that when, you know, I look at a marble rock, I'm like, oh, it's the same thing as me. Just on like a very different timeline. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your day job and what it is, or if you're not comfortable sharing, how it relates to your artistic practice?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. My day job is that I'm a graphic facilitator. It's a unique job that only about 50 or so people have in the country. But I work in a way kind of like I'm a professional mind map scribe or a professional visual note taker. And so what my skill set is that I am frequently invited into brainstorming meetings by all kinds of different clients and companies and services, or oftentimes at really big summits like TED Talks where people are sharing ideas. And then I am put in front of a whiteboard, and then I am tasked really quickly to be able to listen in real time what people are saying, and then create a visual map that then translates that verbal stream into a map of symbols and meaning within that, 45-minute talk time. So that way at the end, there's like a big visual infographic that represents what's being talked about. And so that's
Quite amazing.
It's a very, very niche skill set. It was something that I was trained to do when I moved to New York City in my 20s. I was going to be an artist in New York City, and then the recession happened, and I had to get a job, and no one was hiring, and I needed health insurance, and I got a job in advertising. And then when they learned I had a background as an artist and that I was someone that loved lots of information and organizing information, they're like, oh, you might be into this graphic facilitation thing. And then I've been doing that now for about 10 years. And it's a strange job in that I get to be like a proverbial like fly on the wall and just sit in on a lot of these meetings and listen to things and create diagrams. It's also a job where I get to travel a lot and work with a lot of people from different industries outside the arts. So like one week it might be a DEI summit, the next week it might be big data, the next week it might be a logistics company talking about how they're going to solve for recruiting issues for truck drivers, because there's a shortage of truck driver labor. So it's all these different subjects.
And you have other bodies of work that kind of go on in tandem with some of this.
Yeah. I have other bodies of work that do reference the day job of being a graphic facilitator. Corporate environments. I mean, they're always, it's funny, this body of work has really come out of kind of the last three to 4 years of projects I've been thinking about, like really kind of going deep into this world of symbols, but this world of symbols that is, you know, organized around kind of scientific and mystical themes. A lot of the business work is more, I'd say it's like more absurd in the way that when you really look at, you know, late stage capitalism in the United States, I think you have to have an absurd humor to be able to make sense of it all. But I oftentimes get asked like, what is the connection between my day job and my art practice? And how I like to ground that is it's just symbols. It's like using symbols as systems of communication and trying to take really big concepts and then break them down into salient points that then are accessible and interesting to people. So it's all a type of like visual communication and visual storytelling, but my day job is about making information really clear, and then my fine art practice is about letting it be as like cryptic and surreal and witchy as I want it to be. So, you know, I get to live in both worlds.
But it's also a form of sculpture, wouldn't you say? Like creating things in 3 dimension.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Would you say that it's a form of sculpture, the mind mapping?
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone that really believes that sculpture is anything that embodies physicality, and physicality can also be a dematerialized form of physicality. So, yeah, I mean, I do think of the mind maps as being physical things, and in the process of making them is really, it is performative. I mean, if you could see me in front of it, I'm in these big whiteboards that are like 4 feet by 6 feet, and I'm tasked to fill up a new one like every 45 minutes to an hour, so I'm like hustling really fast. So I'm like moving like this and like drawing like this in front of it. So it is very much so like a dance, which I will say is partly what got me really into movement research dance, just learning that there was an entire field of dance work that wasn't formal like ballet, but actually was just the accumulation of like little weird gestures and then synchronized. And I was thinking, oh, that's me. I'm also doing these like small gestures and through learning about people like, you know, Yvonne Rayner's like hand dance works. Like those are really inspirational for me as I'm doing my own really small scale movements. And also when I'm in the field as a graphic facilitator and I have to draw for 6 to 8 hours a day, I'm very conscious of tiring the muscles in my hands. So I do a lot of these exercises. So it is all related, but thank you for asking that.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah.